Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on Timber Frame Direction Level 3 qualification. We hope you're all keeping safe and well. We are still working from home at the minute delivering this webinar, so we apologise in advance for any background noise or any delay that may occur from the slides. You will receive a copy of this PowerPoint via email and a link to the recording and a certificate of attendance which you can log for CPD records. You can access the recordings to all the previous webinars and register for up-and-coming webinars from our Skills for Wales website. You'll also receive a link to a survey. This will come via the email, but it will also go in the chat function today during the webinar, so one of my colleagues will put that in there. And we would be grateful if you could take the time to fill this in, as the feedback is so valuable to us in ensuring that the events and support that we're offering to our providers and centres are meeting your needs and the needs of your learners. Next slide, please. So what we're going to cover this morning, just to have a look at the agenda, we'll do some sort of welcomes and introductions. Then we will look at why the transformation of these qualifications have occurred. Then we'll take a look at the qualification content for this Level 3 qualification TFE. We'll then have a look at the structure of the units, which I'll take you through as well. And I'll hand over to my colleague Ian, who will then start and look at the summary of assessments and the employer confirmation guide. Following on from this, our colleague ddarparu, who's also on the webinar today, will look at the learning resources and next steps. And then at the end, there'll be opportunity to ask any questions. But what we would love to encourage you to do is please type in any questions you have in the questions tab on your GoToWebinar panel. Hopefully everyone can access that. So just a few introductions. As I've mentioned, I've got colleague ddarparu on the webinar today, and David is the lead technical advisor for building services at City and Guilds. There is myself, Jason Howe. I am a technical advisor for construction at City and Guilds, and unfortunately she's not on the call today, but we're usually joined by Anne Harrod Lloyd-Benyon, who is the policy and stakeholder partnership manager at City and Guilds. And finally, last but not least, our colleague Ian Roberts, who is also on the webinar today, is a technical advisor for construction at City and Guilds. So we're now just going to have a look at why the transformation occurred. So in February 2018, Qualifications Wales published the Building the Future report, which was a sector review of all the qualifications and qualification systems in Wales for construction and the built environment. And what that found, and what the report found, was that there was inconsistent assessment practices. Some areas of learning were not effectively being assessed, and learners were needing to deal with a range of tasks and problem solving. So to meet the needs and the skills needs for Wales, what that wanted to do was look at reducing the complexities of the systems, which had over 400 qualifications, improving the coherence with clear pathways and progression routes, ensuring that those were clear through framework and onto work or into HE. And this is the portability within Wales and beyond as well. This slide, I'm not going to go through each section of the slide, but again, you will receive a copy of this. We just wanted to showcase some of the FAQs that you may have, and you may want to refer to, and the responses that we have on the slide there. Our next slide shows the possible learner journey with the different options for learners depending on what their entry route would be into the new qualifications. So if a learner was to start on the foundation, they can start, and all these qualifications were launched, can start from September 2022. Some of the foundation and progression obviously started September 2021. But for the purpose of this, if a learner was to start on the foundation, they can then progress straight into the new apprenticeship, and they will be exempt from the core qualification, which we'll come on to shortly. Another route is starting on the foundation, moving into the progression, and then finally finishing on the apprenticeship. And another option, as shown on screen, is a learner starting with a broad level 1 into foundation and apprenticeship. Or the fourth option will be, again, starting with that broad level 1 into foundation, into progression, and then finally into apprenticeships as well. The apprenticeship framework is currently out for consultation, and we await the outcome of that. But learners from September can start straight into the new apprenticeship qualifications, which we're going to discuss today. And as part of that, they would have to do the core component as well of that qualification. And the core is essentially the same as the foundation, whereas the foundation consists of 2 trade pathways. The core would only consist of 1 trade pathway, and that will be aligned to the apprenticeship. So we're just going to now look at some of the qualification content. Next slide, please, Ian. So this kind of follows on from the slide previously. As mentioned, you've got the foundation and core, and the ones listed on screen there, they contain both the construction and the BSE pathways. So obviously plumbing and electrotechnical systems are included within that, within the traditional construction pathways. Then you move on to progression, which on screen there is listed in the construction pathways. Our colleagues at EAL support the BSE pathways for progression, and similarly for the level 3s. And then finally, on the final box on the right hand side there, we have the level 3 pathways for the construction level 3 apprenticeships, and today we're focusing on the timber frame. All of the documents that you see that we talk about today, the qualification handbook and the assessment documents, etc., all of that information can be located on the Skills for Wales website. Thank you, Ian. So just to look at timber frame erection now in a bit more detail, with any qualification, there's always a rule of combination. So with all of the level 3 qualifications we have and on apprenticeships, they have 6 common core units, which is unit 301 to 306. Then you would obviously select the trade-specific pathway, and for the purpose of this, we're looking at TFE, timber frame erection, and within that pathway, there are 5 units. Within this combination of ruler combination, there are 3 assessment methods, and learners must successfully achieve a pass or higher grade in each of those 3 assessment methods to be certificated. And for the purpose of this, the GLH aligned to the timber frame erection level 3 qualification is 790 hours, of which 72 hours of that is for assessment. And as a blended model, the GLH can be delivered either within the training provider or within industry. Next slide, please, Ian. So as I mentioned previously, these are the 6 common core units that are included within each pathway, and they're standardized across the board. So we have the individual unit numbers, the titles, and the assigned GLH on that. And all of the GLH is bespoke to the unit in line with the content of the unit and what is required to be delivered and assessed. Next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. And then moving on, these are the 5 trade units that we previously mentioned for timber frame erection. And on the top of the screen there as well, we have the common core units also. So again, each unit has its bespoke GLH aligned to it, which takes into account the depth and breadth of delivery and the outcomes and assessment criteria contained within them. And all of those GLH, including the assessment GLH of 72 hours, give you a grand total of 790 GLH. So just have a little look at the unit structure now, and if you're familiar with City and Guilds qualification handbooks previously, these should be fairly familiar to you. Move on, please, Ian. But there has been some additions that will hopefully be supportive for staff and tutors who are looking to plan and deliver these qualifications. So with regards to the learning outcomes, what we know is that they're chunks of related practical skills and knowledge that learners have to be able to be taught and be able to do following all of their teaching and learning. Learning outcomes are then broken down into assessment criteria, and this is what's linked directly to what will be assessed in connection with that learning outcome. What is a common practice with City and Guilds is we always provided a range, and what the range does, it gives a bit more of the breadth of what's required for delivery in line with the assessment criteria. And it is advised that all elements listed within the range must be covered as part of the delivery of the unit, either by the training provider or within industry. And what that ensures is that learners are getting the full breadth of knowledge and practical skills. Next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. So just looking at the structure and how it's laid out within the qualification handbook, Again, these are on the Skills for Wales website, and we would certainly encourage that you start and have a look at those and the assessment packs as well. So within the qualification handbook, we have the unit title at the top of the page, followed by the GLH, and then there's a description or a brief description about that unit. So for the purpose of this, we're looking at the unit is understanding construction practices in Wales. And what tutors can do is they can use these brief descriptions as part of schemes of learning or introduction to units for learners, so that they know what's coming within their teaching and learning in your centre or within the workplace. Followed by that, you have the learning outcomes. And for the purpose of this, we're just going to look at learning outcome 2, which is understand safe working practices. Next one, please, Ian. As the qualification handbook moves on, you've got the learning outcome, which we've previously covered. Then you would have the criteria, or assessment criteria as it's more commonly known. And then beneath that assessment criteria, we would have the range, which will give you the breadth. What is new and what is an addition now, and hopefully tutors will find this very supportive, is we've got a delivery outcome as well. And that takes the assessment criteria and the range into a bit more detail to cover the depth of content that needs to be delivered as well. So again, to cover all avenues and all sides, tutors should now have a full comprehensive understanding of what needs to be delivered as part of that assessment criteria and learning outcome. So this is the new component, which is hopefully very helpful to tutors. So this is a standard, one of the common core units that we've just looked at. We're now going to have a little look at one of the trade units. And what you should see here is that the layout and the format, again, is very standardized between the common core units and the trade units. So we have the unit number and title, we have the GLH, we have the brief description. Again, this can be used to inform learners of what's going to be taught within that unit. And then we have the learning outcome. Next slide, please, Ian. Moving on from that, again, similarly to the previous common core unit, which we looked at, top of the screen, we have the learning outcome, the criteria and the range, and then finally we have the delivery outcome as well, which again just covers in depth. And what this one does just highlights that the delivery outcome is slightly different, because this one's bullet pointed, whereas the common core unit example wasn't. So showing that we're trying to provide that diverse range of knowledge and depth of content to tutors so that they can deliver it effectively. I hope that's been helpful for you. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Ian, who's going to take you through the summary of assessments and further slides. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jason. And I will commence, as Jason's mentioned, going through the summary of assessments to move this forward. The timber frame erection level 3 qualification is assessed using 3 methods of assessments. The first one is the on-screen assessment, which is multiple choice questions, which is externally set and externally and automatically marked with an overall weighting of the overall qualification of 20%. You will see that this will include 2 tests, Test 1 and Test 2, which I will come back to. The practical project covering the trade area that they are working towards. This is carried out within industry, set in agreement with the employer and assessed by the assessor employed by the training provider. This will then be externally quality assured as an overall weighting of 60% towards the qualification structure. The professional discussion is new to everybody, and this one is externally set and externally marked and will be carried out by a trade-specific member of the awarding organisation and has an overall weighting of 20%. The difference between these methods of assessment from the foundation, the core and the progression qualification is that that is a guided discussion, and that is now then like a stepping stone into this, which is now called the professional discussion. We will be going through each method of assessment in the up and coming slides. But just before we do move on, I would just like to reinforce that we have an assessment pack detailing the requirements of the assessments that can be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website if you wish to look into it in greater depth. Here, and within this slide, like I mentioned earlier, I'd like to go in more in depth of each method of assessment. The on-screen assessment, as we've mentioned previously, contains two tests, Test 1 and Test 2, and can be taken at any stage in the assessment process. Although this is on demand and completed at any time, it is advisable to complete prior to the professional discussion. Test 1 contains 45 questions and the learner will have 70 minutes to complete. Now, this may have been completed during their second year, or a learner who may have completed while working towards their progression qualification, because they will have achieved this as it is exactly the same test. And Test 2 is completed in their final year and has 32 questions and a timing of 50 minutes. And that timing of 50 minutes, that's allocated to that learner to complete the multiple choice online questions. The practical project is made up of 3 elements or tasks, or I would class them as elements, to be honest, and it's very similar to what we have in the foundation, the core and the progression, because this includes planning, the performing and the evaluating are the 3 elements. The project, as we've mentioned previously, has got to be carried out in the realistic working environment, and they can select from a number of tasks that are outlined within the assessment pack. But however, these cannot exceed any more than 4 work-based tasks. And like we've mentioned earlier, the assessor employed by the training provider will carry out assessment visits, which will include a minimum of 3 visits. The professional discussion will be carried out by a member of the awarding organisation and will be occupationally competent in this particular area. This will be carried out in a one-time sitting and can be either virtual or face-to-face. The professional discussion will last no more than 40 minutes and will be graded pass to distinction. There will, however, be an additional 5 minutes allowed for the learner if they're going into the final question. The learner will need to demonstrate of their knowledge, understanding and performance from the occupational competency standards relevant to their trade. They will also be required to reflect on the practical project they have completed within their discussion. The professional discussion can only take place once the learner has completed their project and the employer confirmation document, which we'll go through shortly. So the online assessments, they will contain engaging multiple choice question types and styles, and are all online with results received immediately after the assessment. Test 1 may have been achieved previously if the learner successfully completed their progression qualification within the same trade. So for example, if you have a learner that's done a bricklaying course at the progression, then they would still have to sit the test 1 because it's not the same trade area. If the learner has not taken the progression qualification and they've come through the core and then straight into the apprenticeship route, then they have to sit and achieve both tests. Here you can see on the right of the slide assessment information for test 2, where it's 32 questions and they require a minimum of 21 correct responses to attain a pass. And that section of that slide is a direct extraction from the assessment pack, which can be located on the Skills for Wales website. Excuse me. We are now going to cover in more detail the practical project. A learner will have 12 hours to complete all of their planning, and this may include up to the 4 tasks or the projects that's included or that they have decided to include. They then have 45 hours to complete the performing and 12 hours to complete the evaluation of the tasks they have included within their project. A gentle reminder that the project cannot include any more than 4 work-based tasks. And also, if a learner completes the planning within 12 hours, for example, if they complete it in 9 hours, they cannot allocate the additional 3 hours to either the performing or the evaluating. And again, it's the same with the performing. If they've taken only 40 hours for the performing, they can't use the additional hours that they have left to help with the evaluating. As previous further information, like we've mentioned, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, can be located on the website within the practical section of the assessment pack. And the link is at the bottom of the page for you. With regards to the professional discussion, and this is a new method of assessment, here you can see a brief overview of the content and timings. The units we have identified, along with the learner's reflection on the practical project, this should help you in supporting the learner in being prepared to meet the external assessor. Project documentation can be available during the professional discussion to help make the learner, to enable the learner to make reference to accordingly. And as you can see, the discussion will have to be recorded and captured in a secure GDPR compliant way. And before we move on, just to reinforce that the professional discussion will be conducted by a competent external assessor from the awarding organisation, which is City and Guilds for this qualification. We are all aware that there is no NVQ within the level 3 qualification. Learners, however, will still have to gain the skills and knowledge within industry to carry out and fulfill their role within the construction industry. Within this slide, we can make reference to the employer confirmation document and how this will help support the learner in meeting the qualification requirements and attaining their CSCS card. The guide which I will go through provides guidance to employers and training providers on how the occupational competency statements set by industry have been met. This document, when completed, will provide employers, federations and industry the confidence that the learner has provided evidence of meeting the occupational competency statements which have been outlined and agreed by industry. Provisional grade for the practical project will undergo internal and external quality assurance. The professional discussion, the external assessor will confirm the overall grade. And the overall final grade will be issued through the relevant awarding body. And in this instance, it's City and Guilds, because City and Guilds are the awarding organisation for all construction qualifications, and our partners EAL for building services engineering. Learners can resit assessments or make a resubmission when a learner fails to achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments. And further guidance on the resit, etc., can be found in the assessment pack. But we'll just be going through a little bit more brief overview on the next slide. Taking the on-screen assessment, although there are no limits to the number of times a learner can take, you should provide additional learning prior to a retake. When a retake is taken, the learner can still achieve the full marks and grades available. But please, make sure that the learner is ready to sit any of the online assessments, because what you will find, sitting the assessment too early could well result in having the learner having to resit. Our professional advice is that try and make sure you've practically completed the practical project, especially the planning and the performing and the evaluating, before you consider sitting the second test, because the learner is gathering further knowledge and understanding as they're working through the project. The practical project, here you can see the opportunities, and rather than having to resit the entire project, they can retake the criteria that they failed to attain the relevant mark required. For example, regarding the planning, if they do not meet the threshold pass, then they can resubmit the criteria that they failed and will be reassessed within the resubmission. The professional discussion, when a learner fails to successfully achieve, then they are permitted to resit. However, they must resit the whole professional discussion. And once again, on a resit, a learner can achieve the full range of marks, and any resits, especially for the professional discussion and online assessment, will have to be booked via the walled garden. Now I'm going to go and touch on the employer confirmation guide, because this is the new implementation that people are going to have to complete and work towards. But before I begin, may I take this opportunity to say thank you to all the stakeholders for their valuable contribution and feedback we have received, and that has helped the consortium in shaping what I'm about to present. The employer confirmation is part of the learner journey and will help strengthen the relationships between employers, centres and the learner. And this is something that was clearly outlined within the review that was carried out. Although this is only part of the learner journey, and the process will enhance the employer role in the delivery of the new apprenticeship qualification in the construction and built environment sector. As we are all aware, the learner will spend a considerable amount of their time in the realistic working environment. And the purpose of the confirmation sign-off is to capture the activities and provide stakeholders, including trade bodies, confidence that the learner is occupationally proficient and has covered the full range of the relevant standards to allow the learner to progress to the final part of their assessment process, which is the professional discussion. Although there is no MVQ within the new apprenticeship model, a learner will still have to provide a range of evidence that allows the centre to check the employer confirmatory sign-off is valid. Upon successful completion of the assessment process and the confirmatory sign-off, a learner will then be in a position to attain the relevant skills card. So they've completed the project, the 2 online tests and the professional discussion. Without the employer confirmation sign-off, that learner will not be able to gain the CSCS card. We are all aware that the employer confirmation process is new and undoubtedly may raise a few concerns. We are here, though, the consortium, to provide centres and employers with instructions and the requirements for completing this process. And this is also contained within the employer confirmation guide. But we will further communicate this at our centre and employer events, and they're currently being scheduled for May and June. And they're being scheduled to ensure that at times it's for unsociable hours for employers to be able to gain access to. The document will be retained on the Skills for Wales website. Here we can see how working collaboratively we can support the learner along their journey that they will undoubtedly require to move forward and progress to their final assessment of that, and it is a robust assessment process, the professional discussion. As you can see on the slide, by working together, employers and centres will provide opportunities that will allow the learner to gain valuable industrial experience and complete the activities outlined within the employer confirmation guide. Whether it be 1, 2 or 3 employers, because we do have apprentices and learners that work with shared apprenticeship schemes such as Coupler and Apprentice, they will work with the learners throughout their apprenticeship. Hence the reasons why we have made provisions on the various forms inside the employer confirmation guide for more than one employer to work on the relevant documents. Work-based learning providers and centres will work with employers to guide and support to ensure the occupational competency statement log is being completed correctly. And as you can see, the pieces start to come together, and this is through working collaboratively together to ensure that learner journey does run smoothly. This process is to ensure the learner is prepared for the final assessment. As you can imagine, this hasn't been a smooth journey, as change is always and sometimes very difficult to accept. We have engaged with a considerable number of stakeholders, including micro businesses, medium to large contractors, and federations including colleges and private training providers. And as you can see, this is the front page, the contents and the section that is contained with the employer confirmation guide. The document is in both in English and in Welsh. Whether it be 1, 2 or 3 employers, they will work with the learners throughout their apprenticeship. Hence the reasons why we have made that provision on the various forms for more than one employer to work on the documents. The employer confirmation guide will be trade specific, and as I've mentioned, can be located on the Skills for Wales website under the trade specific heading. The document will be a writable PDF and can be completed either electronically or hard copy, depending on what is required. The employer confirmation is the responsibility of the employer and learner working collaboratively with the learning provider. And as we've mentioned previously, although not part of the qualification, this has to be completed prior to the learner moving forward to complete the final assessment, the professional discussion. That completes this set of slides for now, and I would now like to pass you on to David, who will take you through the next set topics. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Ian, and good morning, everyone. I've just dropped into the chat a couple of survey links, so I'll mention that a few times as we work through, but it might be worth having a quick look on there. If you can click on those and open those up, and then at the appropriate time, hopefully you can just spend a couple of minutes just to complete those surveys. But we're going to have a quick look at some of the resources. So thank you very much, Ian. We'll maybe start looking at some of the resources now. Excuse me. So our first step to access information will always be the Skills for Wales website. And from there you will see under the Qualifications tab a list of sectors. Click on your sector and scroll down to the bottom tab, which is titled Centre or Qualification Documents, and here you'll find 2 documents. Those would be the handbook and secondly the employer confirmatory sign-off. So in terms of the resources that Jason and Ian have been discussing, please, if you can't find those, please follow those instructions. It should take you to them. And if you're struggling to find them, please drop it in the chat or the questions or emails afterwards, and we'll support you with that. But the handbook contains content along with various requirements for the qualification. We always recommend that's the best starting point. You can find various other supporting documents on the website which cover all the qualifications from foundation through to level 3. Please familiarise yourselves with the website and those documents. And as I say, if you're struggling, please let us know. So as we move on, we'll now have a look at the delivery planner. So many of you should be familiar with this from previous webinars and from using them to support your delivery of the foundation qualification. The delivery planner is fully adaptable and equally as useful for delivering the level 3 qualifications. Please allow time to consider your delivery and your timings, and if you wish to use this document, please feel free to share your thoughts and plans with us. If you would like us to talk through this, or if you'd like to talk through this with us, we can have a chat, we can support with that, absolutely no problem. Okay, thank you, Ian. So as previously promoted, we have a suite of sector books from HODA. To support the new suite of qualifications, HODA have created 3 mapping documents to support staff and learners in accessing the related information. Please contact Thomas Stotter direct for more information. His email details are on the screen now. So if you haven't spoke or contacted Thomas before, please do make contact and discuss a variety of textbooks and support material with Thomas direct. Thank you. So let's have a look at some of the next steps. We'll talk you through the approval journey. And here we can see that centre approval commenced in January 2021 with the foundation and progression, and now closely followed by the level 3 qualification. Provided you haven't already gained centre approval, the following slides will help provide a broad overview of the approval journey for centres. As we're aware, these are brand new qualifications and an offline application has to be completed. If not already done so, it is available in the Become a Centre section of the Skills for Wales website. And this is for all qualifications for both awarding bodies. Centres only need to complete one application. On completion, it should be forwarded to skillsforwales.quality@cityandguilds.com. And this section also contains centre FAQs around approval. So if you're struggling a bit to understand what you've got to fill in or where or which bit, there is an FAQ which would be really helpful. And you can also contact that email address for some additional support. Thank you, Ian. So how does it all look and how does it all work? Well, centres can expect a decision on approval within 30 working days of completing the application. And please note, separate approvals must be submitted for sub-centres. Centres do not need to invent new documentation for much of your IQA. So if you have current IQA planners, review documents, a lot of all those documents can just be basically adapted to the new qualifications. It shouldn't mean wholesale changes. Thank you, Ian. On the next slide, we can see here some future training and events that we are holding. These are brand new qualifications, and we recommend you take the time to register, as you have done for this, on one of these events. There are also some CPD events that we're holding around Wales, face-to-face, most of them. Please, if you don't know about those, please speak to your managers. They've all been arranged with your managers, and they cover both BSc and construction for the foundation. And there's a lot of good supporting information in those sessions. So please make a note if you've not been invited to one of those. Please have a word with your manager and see which session that your centre is invited to. So yeah, on the screen there you can see a variety of those. So that's it really from us. Thank you very much for listening to that. We hope it's been helpful. We're just going to pause for a moment now to look at any questions that have popped up. So I can't see any at the moment. So have a think about any queries you have at all on any of these qualifications. So it's predominantly the level 3 today, but if you've got queries on progression, on the foundation, any queries about content, assessment, support, where your CPD is coming from, any questions at all, please do ask. Myself, Ian and Jason will do our best to answer all of your questions that come up. We can also unmute you, so if you want to describe your question, you don't just have to type it in. We just drop a note on the chat or the question, and we can unmute you and you can have a chat to us and describe what your query might be. Whilst you're thinking of those questions, we'll just cover a final couple of slides. So what you'll see here is a request for feedback. So I mentioned that just a bit earlier. You'll see it in the chat. You will be sent these links as well, but if you just click on them in the chat, and any feedback whatsoever on any of the qualifications, please do let us know. We really want to hear your feedback on these qualifications. The advantage of doing the feedback on the surveys is they're all logged. It's all officially logged. So your thoughts and your comments will be logged and shared with various stakeholders. So often it's the best way to have your voice heard. So please do fill in those surveys and contact us with any queries or feedback on those. And on the final slide, you'll see an email address, which is very useful. So after today, you may think of some questions that we've not been able to answer, or I know how it is. Sometimes you walk away and think, oh, crikey, I wish I'd asked that. Well, please drop it on those email addresses there on the screen. You can share feedback, thoughts, questions, if you want extra support, anything at all that you need, please do let us know. So I can't see any questions coming in, so hopefully that's a good point. Oh, sorry, the one's just popped in there as I've clicked on it. So if the employer can only provide part of the assessment, how would this be dealt with? So Mr. Roberts, if I could come to you for that one, please.
Yeah, definitely. The assessment is a mandatory requirement. So it's in discussions with the employer to make sure that they do cover the range that's there. Otherwise, the learner will not be able to achieve the level 3 qualification. What we've found with shared apprenticeship schemes like Apprentice and Cuffler, what they do, obviously, they share the learner goes sometimes from employer to employer to be able for that learner to gather that particular evidence. There's no simulation allowed whatsoever, only when it's stipulated in the occupational competency statement. And what you'll see is what's in the employer confirmation guide has got to be gathered from industry. But regarding the assessment on the project, when you look at the assessment pack itself, it gives you a number of tasks, areas that learner can gather their evidence from for the practical project. And that's what they have to gather accordingly. And it is about working closely with your employer to make sure that that opportunity does come. So when you take the learner on, obviously during your introduction with them, is to make sure that the employer is aware of the assessment methodology and what will be a requirement moving forward. This overall method of assessment has come from the actual review itself, and employers did want a bigger part to play in this, and that's the reasons why it's been developed as it is, in line with what Qualifications Wales have requested, in line with the outcome of the review. So there's no simulation allowed. It's got to be carried out in industry. It may be just one project. They may be able to carry out their activities under one large project. It's something you're going to have to look at and closely discuss with the employer moving that forward. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Ian. Hopefully that's answered your question. If we've misunderstood or if you've got some further questions, please do fire away. And again, you've got your survey to make your feelings known on some of these things. But anyone, we've not got many attendees in comparison to some of the other sessions, but there's still plenty of you on there. If you've got any questions at all, please do ask us and we'll do our very best.
David, while they're still thinking about questions, can I just raise this, please, if I may? And that is the future webinars that's coming up for May and June, I should say. We've got 4 purely on the employer confirmation guide. So we'll be doing webinars on them, and we've set them at times. One is 5 till 6 on an evening, and then another one 6 till 7 on an evening. Then we've got one at lunchtime, and one at 4 till 5, I do believe it is. They'll be coming out soon as webinars. So that's to try and attract employers as well as yourselves, so we can go through more in depth on the employer confirmation guide and what needs to be completed. That is 2 in May and 2 in June. We've also got another 4 for centres, excuse me, which is being prepared to commence the delivery. So it's actually being prepared to deliver the level 3 come September. So that is more or less, there will be webinars, but it'll only be a short presentation. It's more for questions more than anything for you to be able to ask and get direct responses from. So please keep your eyes open for them. And please don't forget to register on them as well. Okay, thank you for that, David.
Thank you very much, Ian. Well, I can't see any more questions coming in, so I don't see any need to continue with the webinar. If you've had all your questions answered and you're happy with all that content, oh, just got another one coming. Do all candidates have to start with the core if they have industrial experience? Can they skip the core? No, the core is a mandatory part of the apprenticeship. So they will have to complete the core qualification as part of the apprenticeship. Hopefully that's answered that. Is there anything to add, Jason or Ian?
No, I think you've answered it perfectly, David. I think the only other thing is, if you've got an experienced worker through, like you deliver at the moment, through the OSAT route, a learner can still go through the OSAT route, just purely collecting his level 3 NVQ, because that's still going to be available. The only difficulty with that is it's not going to be funded. So when it comes to the funding element, although the learner can gain, it will have to be full cost, unfortunately. So there is still the opportunity for the OSAT route, but obviously you'd have to go through their requirements to make sure they meet that requirement to go through that provision. But otherwise, like David said, an experienced worker with a couple of years who's still going to have to go through the majority of the apprenticeship, then they would have to do the core. Obviously, the learning that's industry experience that they have would help, all right, but it's how you record that then accordingly moving it forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So, final shout out for questions, please. Any final questions or follow-up questions, or if anyone would like to come off mute, please let us know. There's nothing more coming through, Ian and Jason. So really, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much to the delegates for attending. We hope you found it useful. Thank you very much to Jason, and particularly Ian, who pulled together all the information for these webinars and does a fantastic job pulling it all together and setting them all up. So big thank you to the panel, thanks to the delegates, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon.